Hey everyone, up until this point we have downloaded Python using Anaconda distribution. We have set up our command line so we can run Python scripts from it, and we've also played with creating and maintaining virtual environments so we can isolate our data science applications and their respective package versions. The next logical step is to download a code editor, right? So this is where we'll do most of our development work, and my code editor of choice is VS Code, which is a free source code editor offered by Microsoft. And I like it because it comes with many features and many extensions in its marketplace. Some of them are already mentioned here. So it offers you debugging, syntax highlighting, IntelliSense. It also comes with Git embedded. So this just allows you to streamline your entire data science workflow. You can clone your code, you can make changes, you can commit it to GitHub, Azure DevOps repos, or any other version control system that your company might be using. So let us get started with downloading this. And you can just click on download. Right, so now we can just get started with installing it. I accept the agreement, and you can select where you want to set this up. Make sure that you have enough space, whichever drive you are downloading this to. And much like we did with Anaconda distribution, we are going to uncheck this add to path option for now, because we always want to know what we are adding to path variable and why we are doing it. So we'll do this later, and for now we'll just keep it unchecked. Okay, so now we'll just wait for it to finish downloading. Okay, so now that it has finished downloading, let us launch it also. So this is what the VS Code interface looks like. Let us close this window. This entire middle area is what we'll call code editor. So this is where we'll be writing and editing our code. This bar at the bottom of the window is a status bar, and on the side you can see activity bar right here. Right, so in the activity bar you have, if you click on Explorer, you'll see a sidebar open, and this is where your project folder structure would appear when you open it. You can click on search, and you can search as well as replace if you want to anything in your code base. This would be source control, and this is where we'll be integrating our local machine with GitHub or any other version control system you have that will be pushing your code to and cloning your code from. Then you have run and debug, and you have extensions, and this is where we'll be installing a lot of extensions from Marketplace that would help us. In fact, some of them are already appearing right now, right? So in fact, let us get started with downloading some extensions which are bare minimum for data science projects. So search for Python extension pack, and so click on this extension and download it. Right, so basically this is a laundry list of many different extensions that are useful for Python development. Obviously Python extension itself from Microsoft, as well as IntelliCode. So this is Microsoft's IntelliSense that helps us with code completion. It also has this auto docstring, which whenever you type 3 quotes, it would auto-complete it to create a template docstring. And docstring is essentially documentation for your Python code. So you can describe what your function, class, or module does within a docstring. Okay, and Python indent is also something which helps us implement correct Python indentation. So while this is downloading, we can go to another important extension, which is PyLens. Well, it seems like that is down. Okay, so yeah, so PyLens is, you can think of it as a logical linter for your Python code, where whenever you write your code, even before you run it, it would be PyLens that would give you various errors or warnings or diagnostics on your code. It also would supercharge your Python IntelliSense, right? So it would just give you even better code suggestions. So it gets downloaded with a Python extension that we downloaded previously, right? So that is that. Now we can download another important extension, which would be Jupyter Notebook. So this Jupyter extension would give us the same Jupyter Notebook interface that we use when we work with Jupyter Labs and Jupyter Notebooks that come with Conda. So let us install this, and it also comes with a set of extensions, right? Jupyter Key Map, Jupyter Cell Text, Right, so now there are many other extensions which you can download and you will be downloading as you move along in your data science journey. But I think this is enough for now to help us get started. So you can also check out different themes that VS Code comes with if you want to change the look and feel of your editor area. So you can click on the settings icon on the lower left corner, select themes, and then select color theme. And you can just scroll and check out different themes and select the one which is optimal for your workflow. In my case, I like the dark version that Visual Studio comes with by default. But yeah, dark modern and dark plus are also the themes that I usually like, but I'll just keep it dark for now. Okay, so now that we are done with all of that, let us try to run a Python script from VS Code. And before that, let us close VS Code and open it from PowerShell. Right, so we'll go to our PowerShell. Remember that we configured our Anaconda such that it will always keep it activated by default the moment we open our PowerShell or command line. So you can see it's already activated our base Anaconda environment. Okay, first project, right? So this was the simple Python script we created under this folder. So let us navigate there. We'll change directory into our first project. Clear. Right, and this is where we have our script. And we also created another virtual environment directly under our root project. So let us do some sanity check. We can just execute our Python script. And even though we have an environment directly under our root project, because the current environment which is activated is our base environment, the Python interpreter that will be used to execute this script would be from the base environment and not from this virtual environment, right? So let us do that. Right. So remember, this was one of the things we discussed in our last video, where let me open the right. So this might be a bit of a revision from our last video, but we wrote this very simple Python script just to play with virtual environments, and we are printing the version of pandas, right, which is an important Python library. And it turns out that whenever we try to use date time 64 with d in square parenthesis data type for date time values in pandas, if your pandas version is greater than equal to 2, then it will give us an error because it does not recognize this data type. And if you check out the error, you will see that the only supported resolutions for date time data types are second, millisecond, microsecond, and nanosecond, right? So what used to happen in previous versions of pandas 1.5 or lower is it used to silently ignore this data type and used to input ns here for us, even if we input d. But from 2 onwards, it would not silently ignore that. It will actually give us an explicit error, right? So I think the virtual environment which we had here use lower version of pandas, right? So if we just activate that, we have to indicate it using a relative path for the virtual environment, right? So right, this would activate it. And let us just check the version of Python, because I don't remember exactly which version of pandas it had, right? So checking the version of pandas that we had here, right? So you can see that it's a lower version of pandas 1.5 and not 2.1, right? So let us exit from this interactive session and let us run that command again, executing that Python script, and this time it would run successfully without giving us the error, right? See, so it silently ignored datetime 64D and gave us datetime 64 nanosecond resolution, right? Okay, so now that we know that's working, let us try to open VS Code from here, right? So we are directly under our root project, and one of the ways of directly opening VS Code from here is to use this command, code space dot. Right, so this is giving us a very similar error which we have already seen before in context of conda and Python, where it tells us that this word that we use, right, code, it's not recognized as a commandlet function, script file, etc. Which is always a hint that you have not added something to your path variable. And remember, we unchecked that box while installing VS Code where it was asking us to add it to path variable. That is what we'll be doing now manually. So let us go to our directory where VS Code is installed. And for me, it was this one. And under that folder, there is a directory called bin. Right, so clicking on that, and this is the path which we have to add to our path variable, right? And then we can always go to our environment variables, right? So edit environment variables for your account, right? You can select the environment variables for your user account, and we've already added all of this in our prior videos. So now we just need to add another one here, which would point to that bin directory under our installed Visual Studio Code. So okay, let us click OK. And before we can use it, we'll have to restart our shell. Right, so let us change directory into our first project. And you can always finish the rest of this word by typing tab, right? And it would auto complete the name of the directory or folder that you want to navigate to. So now that we are here, right, so root of our project, we have our Python script there. So let us now directly open VS Code from under this folder, right? So code space dot, and it should recognize that now. Okay, so yeah, I trust the authors of these files. You can click the welcome message, right? So it has opened our root project, and this is the Python script that we wrote. Right, and you can see it has already started a Python session for us because it would recognize this as a Python script from .py extension. The Python extension that we downloaded is working behind the scenes to discover any Python interpreters that we must have in our system. Yeah, and it's done, right? So you can see on the lower right corner of your status bar, it has already detected a Python interpreter, and it's the one which is there in our virtual environment, right? .first project env, which we created. And if you click on that, it will give you many other options because we also have other Python interpreters, right? So this second one would be in our base environment. No, sorry. That was .mynv2. Okay. Our base environment would be this D drive anaconda python.exe. You can always click on this and you can select the Python interpreter that you want to select. In this case, we want to work with the one which we have directly under our project, right? So it would be this one. So now that we have selected our Python interpreter, let us run this Python script by clicking on this run Python file icon on the upper right corner. Right, and as you can see, this is VS Code's way of activating the Python environment that we have selected and then running the Python script. Okay, and it's giving us the output that we expected. And as usual, if we want to change the environment and go back to base environment and try to execute this, it will give us the same error that we expected, right? So in this case, it's calling on to that Python interpreter and it's executing the Python script. But we can also operate the same way we used to, because this is command line itself, right? This is PowerShell from within the VS Code. Right, so we can select PowerShell here instead of Python's prompt, and right, so it already did automatically activate Anaconda, and we are in our base environment, and we can run our script exactly like we did from the PowerShell itself. So we can use Python. Right, because the script is directly under our root project, we don't need to give absolute path, and we can just run it like this, and it will give us the error. Okay, we can activate our virtual environment, first project env, and we can again run that script, and this time it will give us a correct output. one more thing, and you can also open other terminals, right? PowerShell command prompt from here. Now, instead of, so what running a Python file would do is it would run, oh, let us change our interpreter back to the older version of pandas, right? So, and let us clear this and let us run this. So what our Python prompt or Python terminal did here is it started a Python session, it ran the Python code, and it exited out of the Python session, right? But if we want to start an interactive session while executing the code, but also remain within the session without exiting, then we can select this entire code base or whatever lines of code we want to run, and we can press Shift Enter. Right, and you can see it ran the code, but it also remained within the interactive session. And then we can also continue writing some more lines of code, right? So we can define a number 23.78, and we can print that. Right, so we can select this and we can Shift Enter, and it will continue displaying the code in the same interactive session. And then you can exit out of this. Okay, so one more thing that I wanted to explain in detail before we move along. When you click on run Python file, right, to run your Python script, it would by default run in this Python PowerShell. And you can see that the way it's running is it is activating your Python executable in the Python interpreter that you selected. In this case, it was our .first project env, and then that is followed by your the absolute path of your Python script. Right, now this is very similar to how we do in PowerShell. For example, in PowerShell, we'll right, so in this case we have selected base Anaconda environment. So what we'll do is we'll activate our virtual environment, and then once that is done, we'll just use this command Python with we don't need to use full absolute path for our script because it is directly under this project. So we can just use the name itself, right? And that works. A small difference between these two ways of running these commands is if we get rid of our path variables, right? So let us go to edit environment variables for your account, and let us get rid of this path, right? That was pointing to our Anaconda distribution, and then this which was pointing to our scripts folder underneath it, right? And then we can select OK. We can close our VS Code, and we can also close our PowerShell, and let us restart our terminal. Oh, so that is interesting. Even though I deleted Anaconda from our path variables, it is still somehow detecting it and activating it. Let me see if it still recognizes Conda. Okay, so it's still recognizing Conda command. Okay, let me check. This is unexpected. So let me check my PowerShell profile. So I think one possibility might be that in one of our previous videos, when we were configuring command lines for Anaconda, we used this command, right? Conda init PowerShell to initialize our PowerShell so that it can start recognizing these commands. So maybe it what this might have done is it might have added a command to the PowerShell profile which also has the full path for this Anaconda distribution, right? So once we do that, it does not necessarily need to be in the path variable, I think. Right, so usually your profile, your Windows PowerShell profile is under Documents folder, Windows PowerShell. But there are other possible locations also, so you can Google it and you can find out. So let us see this profile and what it has. Right, so you can see that this command is essentially the result of us using Conda init PowerShell from PowerShell, right? So it already has that path, which is why it's still able to recognize Conda commands even though we don't have them in our path variables. So what we can do, you don't have to make these changes. I just want to showcase the difference between running Python file versus running Python scripts in PowerShell, right? So you can just follow these videos without making changes. So I'll just comment this code out, right? And now I can restart my shell, and the expectation is that it won't recognize, it won't activate, first of all, Anaconda environment by default. So it has done that. And if we use Conda, it won't recognize that as a command, right? So it has worked, right? Deleting those from path variables as well as from our PowerShell profile means that it's no longer recognizing this, right? Now let us, it will say recognize code, right? Because VS Code is still there in our path variable. So we can cd into our first project and we can open VS Code from here, code space dot. Okay, so right, we can delete all of this. Okay, so the Python extension is still working behind the scenes. So get this all set up. Right, so you can see it has already selected the Python interpreter for us, and we can now run it. So we can run the Python file. It's discovering Python interpreters, and it has started our shell. Okay, so this is interesting, right? So it already tried to activate the environment using conda commands, but obviously it is not there in our environment variable. But it was finally able to run this command, right? Because the Python interpreter that we have selected here is this one. So it pointed, it was pointed to that interpreter, and then using that, it was able to run this script. But it wasn't able to run it when using conda command, because obviously we don't have it in our path variable now. So, and keep in mind, right, this is Python shell. This is not a standalone PowerShell. So if we run it again, it would do the same thing and it will run it, right? Now if we open PowerShell, and obviously we know if we try to run it, yeah, so it's already tried by itself and it's not able to do it, right? So that is essentially the difference between these two shells, is that in Python PowerShell, it is already pre-configured by VS Code to look for the Python interpreter that we have selected here on the lower right corner, and accordingly use that to execute the script. Whereas in the standalone PowerShell, you won't be able to do it unless you have conda configured in the path variables, right? So that's the difference. Yeah, let us get those two variables added again. Right, so it was my D drive. And then I also had script. Scripts. Okay. So now we can restart our VS Code. We can restart our PowerShell. It's still not activating it, right? Because remember that default activation comes from your PowerShell profile, right? So even though we have our conda, Anaconda paths added to our path variable, it still won't activate it because in our PowerShell profile, we changed, we commented that out. I'll just keep it commented. So now let us try to see whether it recognizes conda. It should, right? It is. Let us cd into first project again, and let us type code space dot, so that it will open VS Code from under this project. It might seem that we are spending a lot of time trying to understand how to work with Python from command line, but I just bear with me, right? It's super important that you understand that part of it even before you start working on projects, because whenever you work on production scenarios or you work for a company, understanding what's happening under the hood when you execute a Python script is super important, and it will be useful for a whole set of things that you'll need to do in real world scenarios. Okay, so let us clear the history, right? And now let us try to run it. Okay, so it's still, the extension is still taking a while to load Python interpreter. Okay, so let us try to run the Python file, and there it is, right? And this time it will also work if we run the same command prompt, right? So we can activate it and it will recognize that. Okay, so it won't recognize it because this is where this comes into the play, right? For us to use activation commands, right, where we are trying to activate virtual environments, we'll have to initialize PowerShell. So it will need to have this uncommented. So we'll have to restart our session, right? So let us go. We'll have to restart VS Code for that to take effect. Okay, so it has already activated Anaconda by default. And we can cd into first project. And we can go to Visual Code, code space dot. Okay, so let us clear the history, and it has already activated the Anaconda environment, and we can now try running, try activating first our virtual environment. Right, and this time it will activate it, and then we can just run it using Python space the name of our Python script. Well, of course, because the name is first script. And this time it's working correctly. So those are some of the details that you need to be aware of when you're trying to navigate running Python scripts from within your command line. And as you can see that now that we have VS Code set up, we don't need to open a different session of our terminal. We can simply work from within VS Code and access PowerShell, right? So those are some of the ways you run simple Python scripts from VS Code. In the next video, we'll look into how to run Jupyter notebooks in VS Code. Thanks, everyone.